Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and today I am joined by colleague and longtime friend of the show, Alex Suarez. Alex, how have you been doing?
I'm fine, comrade. I had to take a leave of absence from the job. I've been using more of the free time to uh, focus on my writing, things like that. Um, but yeah, here to talk about Venezuela. In case some of the listeners don't know, uh, I think it was like the year before I became your co-host because I was your co-host for I think about a year. It was 2021. I went to
About
Venezuela, so it was 4 years. Yeah, so 2021, 4 years ago, I went to Venezuela. Um, I was a regional election observer, and not only that, I in 2019, prior to that, was embassy protector at the Venezuelan embassy in D.C. And so I've written a couple books on the topic. One was when I came back to the United States. Uh, I wrote The Diplomat about the Alex Saab case. Got to meet his wife when I was down there. Another book I wrote was Embassy Protectors about our actions there. So I've written a couple of books with the topic of Venezuela among the many books that I've written. And so I have a perspective when I'm hearing now the media talk about dictatorship. Even people that are attacking Trump, like Joaquin Castro out of Texas, 90% of what he says I agree with, and then he says things that I know is not true, right? Because I know their electoral process. I maintain contacts down there. Um, I don't think it's good for anti-imperialists at this time, including Mamdani, who said in a recent interview that Maduro is a dictator. That's not only because it's not accurate, but it's helping to facilitate the imperialist invasion to make statements like that.
well, yeah,
Uh,
every time that some liberal or Democrat who calls themselves progressive upholds State Department dictates about other countries and talks about dictators and human rights violations in the country that has a higher percentage of its population in prison than any other country in the world, it doesn't help. I have to agree completely.
and also, you might have noticed that Trump, in a lot of statements, when referencing the so-called narco regime in Venezuela, that's the latest slander. Um, talked in the beginning about both Cartel de los Sol or Cartel of the Sun, and as in the sun in the sky, and Tren de Aragua. Aragua is a region in Venezuela I've actually been to. It's one of the regions they took us when we were down there. And Tren meaning train. So he made references to those two cartels, uh, who the remaining members, if they weren't rounded up by the Chavistas, fled the country. But yeah, he's claiming that these are cartels that Maduro sent to the United States. Notice that he's only lately talked about Tren de Aragua. That's because every time you talk about Cartel of the Sun, actual journalists had exposed the fact that back in the 90s, this is before even Chavez was in power, let alone Maduro. So, like back in the early 90s, um, Cartel of the Sun was invented. And according to 60 Minutes, so it's part of the so called mainstream media, that was a cartel started by the CIA. These are the slanders, the easily verifiable, the false
Well,
slanders that are put
as
out there.
as far as I know, and I'm not an expert on Venezuela. I just done some studies on drug cartels and such in relation to my interest in drug policy here in the U.S.
Hmm.
But as I understand it, Tren de Aragua doesn't even exist in any real sense in Venezuela anymore. It was stomped
Hmm.
out, and the only members are those who fled the country.
Absolutely. And it's like this is a good analogy I could give. It would be like the equivalent of saying because Trump met with Cuban exiles that he's an agent of the Castros. So it's like the people that Maduro was enemy of, that he were not able to capture, that fled the country, they were sent by Maduro. That's like the equivalent of saying somebody who met with the enemies of the socialist government in Cuba makes you an agent of that government. That's how absurd it is.
Well, I mean, by that standard, every Republican and Democrat in the major party leadership is an agent of Israel. But let's not even go there.
Yeah. So another. I'm glad you mentioned Israel, because another thing, people are like, why did Maria Machado, who Julian Assange is suing right now for having got the Nobel Prize, trying to stop the money from Sweden getting to her. Not just Assange himself, but WikiLeaks, the organization, is suing now the Nobel Committee. But Maria Machado, people are like, why was she begging Netanyahu to invade her? And what people don't understand is she wasn't only begging Trump, she was begging Netanyahu because one of her statements was she wanted to move the Venezuelan embassy when she took over to Jerusalem, imitating Trump, who she dedicated the Nobel Prize to, the Nobel Peace Prize to.
I'm glad you brought Machado up, because it's like, when you remember that Alfred Nobel endowed the Nobel Prize because he didn't want to be remembered for smokeless gunpowder, he wanted to be remembered for miner safety, and he thought that endowing the Nobel Prize would make everybody forget the phrase "merchant of death."
Well, dynamite was used for construction purposes at the beginning, right? Then it was used as a weapon.
Well, so this is what's interesting to me and fun. So Nobel was a mining engineer whose family worked in the mining business.
Oh, okay.
And whose original interest in chemical engineering was mine safety, so that fewer miners would die in accidents with explosives, because nitroglycerin was extremely, extremely dangerous.
Yes.
And so Nobel invented dynamite for the express purpose of making nitroglycerin safer to handle for miners when they were underground and couldn't easily get away from any accidental explosions. And it saved a lot of lives. People died in the mines less.
Yes.
However, the experiments that he engaged in while inventing dynamite, and then later what we call det cord, which is an explosive that can be rolled up in a cord itself and is even safer than dynamite. He also discovered what he called ballistium, which was an early form of smokeless gunpowder, which he sold a little bit as fuel for rockets and things like that.
Gunpowder in China started out as fireworks. They used it as fireworks. It wasn't a weapon either.
And his original interest in ballistium was as fuel for signal rockets, to rescue, for sailors who were shipwrecked and needed rescue.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not trying to whitewash him too much. He was a capitalist. He made money off other things and not just good stuff. I'm just talking about his original motives here before becoming a capitalist. But so anyway, the smokeless gunpowder that he used for rockets ended up in England, and the English reverse engineered it and invented cordite, which is the modern basis of all smokeless gunpowder, and which was primarily used for many, many years in military ammunition.
Right.
And he sued the makers of cordite for a patent violation, saying they had stolen ballistium. And they won on a minor technicality. But during the court cases, the British press started calling him the merchant of death, saying he wanted to profit off of gunpowder. And so he endowed the Nobel Prize to escape that reputation.
Well, they said that out of retaliation for winning the lawsuit. I'm sure they used the bourgeois press to do that.
Yeah, well, they did that because they did that in order to influence judges and juries, basically, to help tamper with the results of the lawsuit, is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
It's like, when cigarette companies have these big ad buys saying that cigarettes are safe just before they go to their first main trial in the 1970s or something.
Well, they put chemicals like ammonia and I heard even horse piss into cigarettes, and people are trying to understand, like, why are they going through all these lengths to put these weird things in the cigarette? It's very simple. There was a whistleblower about this. There's a movie with Russell Crowe about it. He was a scientist. Like, they basically hire scientists to find the most addictive way possible for people to get the what's it called, the brain barrier, like to penetrate the brain barrier, so that it's as addictive as possible. When
Well,
they hit that nicotine.
also, they want to build even more than the addiction itself. They want to get you into the habit of smoking.
Yeah, absolutely.
My wife, who's quit successfully but still gets intense cravings, says one of the biggest problems is you're used to a certain motion and feel, and it's such a habit that you find yourself missing it all the time.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because my grandfather, towards the end, this is after he had his stroke and couldn't smoke anymore, would reach out to straws in the hospital thinking that they were cigarettes. It's really sad, right? How that addiction can shorten your life. For example, his sister, same genes, same mother, same father, my great aunt, she lived to about 95 because she quit. Like everybody in the 50s smoked, but she quit early on. And, so she had a number of years in her life where she was not smoking. And he had longevity genes. Even though he smoked and he drank, he lived to 75. But he probably could have lived about another 20 years had he stopped smoking at a certain point. Yeah.
Because I don't drive, I take Lyft a lot of times when my wife can't drive because of her health issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I talk to my Lyft drivers, and the last guy I rode with was from Cuba. Mm-hmm. And he talks about how he did a lot of coughing and talked about how he really wanted to quit smoking, but it was just so hard. And he talks about growing up in Cuba and cigars being part of the culture, and how, it's so, even beyond the nicotine addiction, it's just so hard to give up something that's part of your culture.
Well, actually, pipe tobacco and cigar tobacco are the most healthiest types.
Oh, I'm not saying that's not true.
Right.
I'm just saying that he was really wanting to quit, but it was such a part of his culture that it was really hard.
Well, the interesting thing is they have a lung cancer vaccine.
Yes.
That they invented in the worst period of economic time for Cuba in the 90s, even worse than COVID, because they lost all the support from the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And so at that period, they just give up. No, they invented a vaccine that we don't have access to as Americans. So even though people smoke cigars, you have barely any cases of lung cancer because of that successful vaccine.
One of the most depressing things about Obama, Trump, Biden, and Trump again is that one of the small good things Obama did was that by freeing up the ability for Americans to travel directly to Cuba again, a lot of people in Florida were going to Cuba for cancer treatment.
I didn't know about that.
Yes, people in Florida, especially
older folks. Didn't they threaten to find some of them when they returned, though?
Well, I'm going to get into what happened after that. When Obama opened things up, people were specifically going to Cuba for cancer treatment and some other healthcare stuff, I'm sure, but cancer treatment was the big one. Older folks with lung cancer from years of smoking were going to
brought a group of 9/11 survivors to Cuba to get health treatment as well. It was part of his documentary.
Yeah. And so this was stopped when Trump cut off Obama's Cuba policies and reversed them all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Biden never reversed Trump on Cuba. He never He never started the Obama process of normalizing
kept them on the state sponsor of terrorism list, Biden. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is ridiculous.
And so all these people who were hoping they would get access to their cancer treatment again under Biden didn't.
Yep.
And then, of course, now Trump is back, and now we're going to have a war with Venezuela.
Well, Cuba's involved here because recently, the first they called it an Iranian tanker. So I was a little bit confused of where the ship of oil came from. Yeah. From what I understand, it was Venezuelan oil that was purchased by Iran, sold to Cuba. I'm not sure, but the point is that the tanker was heading to Cuba from Venezuela. It was Venezuelan oil, and the United States stole it. And the reason why it's a big deal, because I reported on this years ago, that Trump had done that in his first regime, that they had stole an Iranian tanker headed to Venezuela international waters and kept it for themselves in an act of piracy. It's not the first time the United States has done this. That was around the time that they were capturing Alex Suarez, finding those routes to bring in oil to Venezuela at the height of the blockade. What's different now is that the size and the scale of not only of the escalation, the military escalation against Venezuela, but the tanker was like the largest in history that the United States has stolen. So this is a significant amount of oil that was being sent to Cuba, who's in a big crisis right now. And the United States offered, I believe, Diaz-Canel, who's the current president of Cuba, the United States offered him to take them off the state-sponsored terrorism list, so that would help ease the embargo again, like under Obama, if they would stop allying themselves with Venezuela. And Cuba said, we're not going to permit that you meddle in our foreign affairs. And so that's why that's persisted. So the Venezuelan case is related to the Cuban case because the United States uses the economic coercion, economic terrorism really is what sanctions are, to try to meddle in how one nation conducts their diplomatic relations with another. I'm sure they're trying to pressure the Mexican government as well, which is a very, very popular government. I mean, you had those recent so-called Gen Z protests, and they were people like 50 and above, and they could barely fill half a plaza up. It was ridiculous. I mean, the majority of people are with Claudia Sheinbaum. It's so clear, just like they were with Ambler before that, who came from the same.
The Gen Z protests included Vicente Fox dressed up in like to wear the sort of clothes that someone his age thinks a 20-something would wear.
Yeah, put a wig on him, make him look younger, put makeup on him. It might as well be a Hollywood production. But these guys are all 15 and above, you know.
It's just, I mean, I think it's hilarious sometimes when Cuba was doing their grassroots movement to reform the Constitution and pass their family law. There were a lot of protests because that's how they organized protest is how they tell their local people what they want and how the local people then transmit it up to the government. This is what the U.S. was branding as anti-government demonstrations, their normal democratic process.
And also, under the Cuban system, which is different than the Venezuelan, they're both socialist in some ways, but their electoral system is a little different in Cuba. Some could argue that the Venezuelan system is more democratic, but let me tell you this. Under the Cuban system, the president would have never been able to, what's the term? Like when somebody's setting up their cabinet,
yes.
Appoint is the legal term. Yeah. So in Cuba, every single member of the cabinet of Diaz-Canel, and this was existed as well under the Castros, is voted in an election. They pick who they want to be in the cabinet, who have some power.
Yes.
And so Obama, when he hired Bush as treasurer, who destroyed the economy, sold out to Wall Street, Geithner, a lot of people were up arms about that. And so when Obama was reelected, he picked somebody else. But a president of Cuba would never have been able to appoint somebody like Geithner because it's the people who vote, and the people would not have voted for something like that.
No, yeah. And the way the Cuban Constitution works is that you have it's the Soviet system. They don't use the term Soviet, but you vote in your local workers' council, and the workers' councils are always accompanied by big rallies that would look like protests if you're used to American style protesting, which doesn't do much but wave signs.
Right.
And so these big political rallies are what the U.S. government was stupidly calling anti-government protests.
Well, let me tell you what happened when it comes to protest laws here in Florida. DeSantis passed a law, which a lot of us call the run-over protest law. And now the context of the run-over protest law is an extension of Stand Your Ground. So there's never been a case of a person of color successfully arguing in court that they were standing your ground, defending themselves against a white person, right? So it only applies to one demographic. Same exact thing with the run-over protester law, because right around the time that law was passed, Cuban Americans who were trying to push Trump to invade Cuba were blocking the roads. And DeSantis supported them because they were his type of Cubans. They were right-wing Cubans.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, a lot of the Cubans now, not just the Venezuelans in the United States, are upset with Trump because a lot of their people are being deported, even though they supported him.
Yeah.
DeSantis is actually using that to ingratiate those Cubans, say, oh, I'm not like Trump. I wouldn't have done that if I was president. But the point is, when you had, Black Lives Matter, people on the left protesting, he was fine with threats of running people over. He was trying to make it legal. But when it was the Cubans that were advocating for regime change, then he turned a blind eye.
Of course. And let's remember that all of these Republican laws to make running over protest legal, while they're actually older than the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville.
Well, this happened after
really
Unite the
made
Right
them
rally
all.
in
What
Florida.
really made them all so urgent to the Republicans was the idea that they had to legalize what happened to Heather Heyer. They kind of liked that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that there was similar moves before Heather Heyer, but yeah, what happened in Florida was after what happened to her. So it was trying to make it like on steroids, right? They were trying to legalize it. And they ended up doing that because DeSantis is very effective. That's why I was very worried when DeSantis was running for president, because I think he would have been worse than Trump. Trump wants to pass a lot of the same policies, but he's inept. DeSantis knows how to get it done. He was a naval lawyer.
They're all Nazis. All the Republicans are Nazis. There's not much difference between them. If there were if there were more difference between them, Trump would have primary opponents who actually got significant votes in Republican primaries, and that hasn't happened.
There was only a total of 3 Republicans who voted in favor of the War Powers resolution that Joaquin Castro was trying to get through to prevent Trump from having the legal authority to invade Venezuela. A total of 3. I can only remember one of their names, Thomas Macy, who's more of a libertarian. But yeah, so yeah, a total of 3. So overwhelming majority of the Republicans want to invade Venezuela. That's clear.
I don't like what Thomas Massey stands for overall, but I've got to admit he's consistent about his principles.
Yes.
I think he's a white supremacist, and I don't think that he really hates war as much as he pretends sometimes, but he really does stick to his principles about not voting for money for anything.
And in the Senate, Rand Paul has also been very vocal about the U.S. going into Venezuela. But again, these are a minority of Republicans, like 2 or 3, a handful.
And let's all remember that Rand Paul is not as good at sticking to the values he claims to support as Thomas Massey.
Right.
He's backed down and voted with Trump people in all sorts of ways, all sorts of times, even when making big speeches.
Yep.
And this whole Venezuela thing where they're getting ready to invade, it's not like this is new. Reagan invaded Grenada, backed the Contras in Nicaragua, supported the junta in El Salvador.
And also invaded Panama for a short time to get rid of Noriega. Yep.
Yeah. Well, that was Bush.
That's right. That was after Reagan. That was Bush's vice president. Yes.
What's funny is that...
I'm sorry, Reagan's vice president, yeah.
What's funny is that the guy who wrote the legal opinion that said, well, the FBI can arrest the president of a foreign country if the U.S. has physical custody of him. And so on that basis, they invaded Panama, took physical custody of him, and the FBI arrested him.
Yeah, and they also violated church law. They invaded a church to get Noriega out of there.
Yes, they invaded sanctuary. They invaded the principle of sanctuary.
Principle of sanctuary, yeah, which is international law. That's right. So I also wanted to mention, when I returned from Venezuela, I was going to college at the time. I was back in college, and I started a Hands Off Venezuela club, and I was recruiting some students, not very successfully, giving class announcements, informing students. That was good. But people actually wanted to join and take part. That was a struggle. And it was also right around the time that Russia went into Ukraine, and there was some political differences there. So it was not successful at that time. Now all the students are saying hands off Venezuela. Here locally in Jacksonville, a lot of them don't know who I am. They're starting their own protests. Everybody's obsessed with Venezuela now. Back when I was talking about it, hardly anybody was paying attention. And who's the cause of all this? Trump. Because Trump is escalating Venezuela so much. Now there's a pushback, and now they're more informed than ever on the topic. And it kind of makes me think of Palestine, right? Because literally when I was a teenager, I was going out and saying we need to advocate for Palestinian rights. We didn't have the technology we have now, where you could live see, massacres going on, on social media. We just had emails from Palestinians that we would get. We'd be on email lists. But why did I have that knowledge? Because my father traveled to the Middle East. And my father had informed me of the Palestinian struggle when I was a teenager. And so I got really involved. But when I would go to my college at the time, I'm talking about way back, right? Because I'm 41 now.
Yeah.
Early 2000s. They would say, oh, you're a terror supporter. They would reject me. Now it's the norm. Now, like Gen Zs, like they're all talking about Palestine, and now they're talking about Venezuela as well. So I try to be optimistic. That's a positive thing, that they're more aware, they're more informed about it. The question is, what can we do about it? Can we bring change? You know.
Well, and that's really the problem. In the short term, it's very difficult to stop the momentum of capital. All you can really do is say the people aren't for this. This is something that's being done against our will. We have to be against this. We have to spike the wheels however we can.
So Fidel Castro's son's cousin, Diaz-Balart, who's a congressman, I believe, in Miami, he was recently confronted with another Cuban-American politician by Medea Benjamin. And Medea, you might know this, she lives half the years in Miami. She's a comrade of mine. For those who don't know, she's one of the co-founders of Code Pink. And she, in a recent video, was confronting him in the airport and saying, you support invasion of Venezuela, but 70% of the American people oppose it. They immedially call her a paid Marxist. You know, they don't address the issue. They just will immediately attack. That's all they know how to do. And I would say Medea is a progressive. She's not a Marxist. And of course, she denied being a Marxist on the show. On the video. That's what they do. So apparently 70% of Americans are Marxists because they have that same position that we shouldn't go into Venezuela.
Well, I mean, that's one of the big things to try to make something that's popular unpopular is call it communist. I don't know how well it works with younger people the way it works with older people. It worked on people my parents' age way too well. Mm-hmm. My parents, fortunately, weren't quite like that. But a lot of people my parents' age were just automatically supported anything the U.S. was doing around the world because it must be good.
Oh, there was a guy on Twitter the other day. And so sometimes what's the term? The fact checked. Sometimes the Twitter fact checked even puts Elon Musk in his place.
Yes.
It can be factual sometimes. So there was a guy that put this tweet out. I was one of the people that responded to it. So I was informed when the
community
accuracy report came in. He was saying, my brother died from a fentanyl overdose, and I don't know what you guys are talking about. It doesn't matter. They mixed this drug with cocaine. If you're saying there's no fentanyl in Venezuela, it doesn't matter. I still want to be for the invasion. Come to find out, this guy was convicted of selling fentanyl.
Well, the one of the ex-presidents of Honduras just got busted for being an international drug cartel operative.
And the former president was pardoned.
Yes.
He brought tons of cocaine into the country at the same time that Trump is saying that his party needs to be the ones that run Honduras again and completely meddling against the Xiomara Castro's party. It's just ridiculous.
Well, this takes us back to the whole backing drug lords in Colombia to pay for sending guns to the Contras because we're not allowed to use congressional money to do it. So Ronald Reagan made deals with drug lords to finance the Contras. There's a Tom Cruise movie about the pilot who did the smuggling for the cartels. And
it's very naive, the movie. I mean, there's bits and pieces in there that are true, but
yes.
It's very naive because it's like just, I showed up in a plane all of a sudden. The government's going to let me do it. You were sent by the government. What are you talking about? Like, it's just, come on, you know?
Well, I mean, it is a very naive movie. At the same time, have you ever watched the true crime documentary about Miami in the 80s, Cocaine Cowboys?
I think I've seen part of it. Yeah, they were very corrupt at that time, the cops here.
It was a very corrupt environment, and the actual pilot for the Medellin cartels makes several appearances. The guy Tom Cruise plays in the movie.
Oh, okay.
And he says, it was so laid back and so wide open that I would frequently just, fly into the airport with a dime bag in my breast pocket and walk through airport security, and no one would ever search me or find it.
A friend of mine who's originally from here in Jacksonville, so he's been here a long time. He's like in his late 40s. Said he remembers when he was a kid in one of the banks here that they were bringing in like duffel bags of cash, just like that scene in Scarface.
Yes.
And that some of the cash accidentally fell out, and he overheard somebody say, "Oh, this is the money that the government confiscated from Noriega." Because here in Jacksonville, there's military bases, so like people could be operating out of South Florida to invade Panama, but they bring the money into Jacksonville. So something that he noticed.
And it's also worth noting that the whole political story we're told about fentanyl is bullshit. Fentanyl does not come from other countries. It doesn't come from China. It doesn't come from Mexico. It doesn't come from Venezuela.
Yeah, Venezuela
fentanyl comes from the trailer park.
Yeah, they make it domestically too, right? That's a good point. Right?
It's not even just that they make it domestically. It's that the economics of fentanyl make it easier to make close to where you sell it, the same way that meth is easiest to make close to where you sell it.
And also, fentanyl is legal as a painkiller, right?
Yes.
They steal it from the hospital or they make their own, and they make
it
mostly
drug. Mostly they make their own.
Right.
In the 1990s, when I was looking at colleges, I was flying into Kansas from the West Coast, right? And I'm reading the Wichita Eagle in the plane, because in those days they had the newspapers for where the airport you were going to in the plane. So I'm reading the Wichita Eagle in the plane, and while I'm reading the Wichita Eagle, I find out this story about this chemistry professor from a university in Illinois who got a job working for the Chicago mob cooking fentanyl in Wichita, Kansas.
What year was this, more or less?
This is like 92, 93, 94.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, all the way back in the 90s, the newspapers who were actually reporting on drug busts were reporting how, oh yeah, we're busting university professors who are making this stuff in a trailer park in Kansas. I mean, it's not really that super different from Breaking Bad.
Yeah, it's like Walter White.
So this is good. Yes, fentanyl existed in the 90s. Fentanyl was invented in the 1970s. Fentanyl was invented by a pharmaceutical chemist who founded a company called Janssen.
It's supposed to be more potent than, what's the other common drug for pain that people take?
It's more potent than morphine.
Morphine, yes.
So, and I'll talk about that too. Heroin was invented because they wanted something more potent than morphine. But heroin was made illegal in the United States in like the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
And so people were denied pain relief in the U.S. And so for the next 50 years, the number one drug project for pharmaceutical companies, both in the U.S. and in Europe, was to create a heroin substitute that would be legal in the U.S. And so a pharmaceutical chemist who founded the company that's now called Janssen invented fentanyl in the 1970s, got it approved, patented, brought it to market, started selling it, and his company became hugely successful based on the patent for fentanyl. So yes, fentanyl existed in the 90s. Fentanyl has been around since the 1970s. Fentanyl started to become a thing in the 90s because international drug interdiction made it more expensive to bring heroin across the Mexican border.
When the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, though, they had plenty of heroin.
Well, the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan is kind of funny because the biggest legal grower of opium is a company called Bayer, which invented aspirin but also invented heroin.
Interesting.
And is a German company.
Yeah, I've heard of Bayer. The Nazis were like
later on. Bayer was was involved with Nazis. Yes,
yeah,
all the big German companies were involved with the Nazis. The Nazis were a creation of German Wall Street, basically.
Right.
But beyond that, Bayer patented heroin and brought it to market first. And between aspirin and heroin, Bayer became hugely successful. Bayer grows legal opium in Tasmania by special agreement with the Australian government.
Mm-hmm.
But people who wanted an alternate source of legal opium were really interested in opening up Afghanistan for growing legal opium.
Right.
And so that was one of the big reasons for the U.S. occupying Afghanistan for so long.
By the way, isn't poppy seeds, like when you have enough poppy seeds, it's the equivalent of opium?
That's a good question. It probably depends on how sensitive your metabolism is, but yes, in theory, if you eat enough poppy seeds, it would be like smoking opium.
Yeah.
But this is really important.
Fentanyl before a drug test. I heard you got to be careful about that.
But fentanyl and meth, which are the two biggest and most profitable drugs on the U.S. domestic market, are both easier and cheaper to make in the U.S. and sell close to where you make it than to bring it in from another country.
Well, I heard the number 2, at least last I checked, the number 2 consumer of cocaine in the world is Spain. It's in Europe. And some of the cocaine that's getting out of Latin America does not go to the United States, actually goes to Europe.
Well, they still there is a, what's the way to put it? In Spain, drugs are marketed more openly to the sort of rebellious kids of the ruling class, so to speak.
Yeah, and also Portugal, all drugs are legal.
Yes, Portugal, everything's decriminalized. Not legal, but decriminalized.
Decriminalized, yeah.
Which is an important difference. And I support, this is a good point. The people doing coke in Spain are probably mostly British tourists.
Well, it's like, when under 20-year-olds go to Mexico or Canada because it's legal then.
Yeah.
You have people from Britain to go to Portugal and Spain. I mean, I don't think Spain is decriminalized, but it's probably easier to get,
It's easy to get to Portugal from Spain. I know that.
I didn't hear what you said.
I said it's easy to get to Portugal from Spain. I know that.
Well, yeah, I mean, all the EU borders are open. Portugal's open before,
And open borders means it's easy to bring contraband back.
Yeah, one time I traveled to the Bahamas. I'm going off on a tangent, but I know you do too.
I do sometimes.
And I accidentally broke a law. I didn't get in trouble or anything. I didn't know that you're not allowed to bring the shells that you pick up at the beach from Bimini into Florida. And I had it in my backpack. They never searched my backpack, but they stopped me because they saw my passport was not stamped. Because it was a day trip. I went in the morning, came back at night.
Yeah.
On one of those, transports. They're not like big as a cruise, but those boats that you can take.
Sure.
And so the reason why they stopped me is because they saw my passport was recently stamped for Cuba, and there was no stamp when I went to the Bahamas. But they never bothered to search my bag. Because later on, after the fact, I found out that had they did search my bag, they probably would have fined me because there was a shell that I brought in, and I gave that shell away to a friend. And I come to find out they're worth a lot of money.
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing. Is that
Miami,
tourists, poachers pretending to be tourists steal a lot of shells for sale on collectors markets.
Well, that's just exploiting the environment. I'm opposed to that. If somebody's going to bring 1 or 2 shells and sell one because they're out of work, that's not a big deal. But you don't want to smuggle and all that. Yeah.
Well, there's you got to remember that the whole reason that there's a law, that this is restricted is not to protect beaches or anything like that. Because remember, we're not talking about fishing or anything like that. We're talking about collecting shells. But what they're trying to protect licensed, approved monopolies. You know what I mean?
Interesting. When I also was going by land from Montreal back in the United States, I had some Cuban cigars I bought there, and they didn't care because if it's for personal use, they don't care. If I had boxes of it, like I was going to sell it, then they'd have a problem.
That makes a big difference, I imagine. Because I know it's illegal to bring them in for sale.
But anyways, let me tell you what I would think would happen based on my knowledge of Venezuela, its history, its people, having been there before. If the United States went in to invade, I would say the war would last longer than Afghanistan. It would probably be about 50 years. It would be a guerrilla war that would go on and on and on because this is a territory that's ripe for guerrilla warfare. There's a lot of areas the United States would not be able to penetrate. It'd be a civil war and then a war where the United States had to stay down there for like 50 years. It would destabilize the region.
History
And also,
shows,
if anything, old allies of Maduro, I mean, not allies of Maduro. Lula was never an ally of Maduro. Lula was an ally of Chavez. And for some reason didn't like Maduro. And that was part of the reason why when they had a BRICS conference in Moscow a couple of years ago, that Lula blocked Venezuela from entering BRICS. But if anything, U.S. policy now is helping to reconcile Lula and Maduro. And also the Colombian and Venezuelan people have been very divided over the years. They were over the same nation at one point.
My
now they're very united because their fishermen are being killed side by side. So if anything, U.S. policy is backfiring. And again, if the U.S. actually goes in as a ground war and they want to try to, succeed, it's going to go on for like 50 years. They're never going to be able to get what they want.
I mean, so the history of invading someplace shows that if you invade someplace, then you're going to end up having to stay there to make sure that whatever you invaded the country to make happen actually happens. And staying there means having to fight a war, whether you've already declared victory or not. We learned that from Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yes.
Is that making what you want to happen in a country requires staying there. You can't just invade and leave, because once you leave, nobody cares what you did while you were there. They take over again.
Why do you think they want to prevent Saif al-Islam, Muammar Gaddafi's son, from running in presidential elections in Libya? As soon as he announced that he was going to run, they tried to make it illegal for him to do so. And then when he won the appeal in court and was going to become a candidate, they shut down the elections, and they haven't permitted elections ever since, because Gaddafi's still very popular among the Libyan people.
Oh, yeah.
Going in there and destabilizing the country didn't do anything but show that they were right, because the Gaddafis warned the people. They said, if you support these kind of revolutionaries against our government, there's going to be a complete disaster. And that's exactly what happened.
I mean, the number one reason, obviously oil makes a difference too, because the French always want Libyan oil. Mm-hmm. But the number one reason that Obama went into Libya and let the French go into Libya was because Gaddafi still wasn't shutting up about the United States of Africa. Yep. He was still trying to create a serious Pan-African federation that could, not be dependent on Europe or the U.S. or even China.
The African Union it wasn't a military alliance, it was a political alliance, and they didn't have currency. So he was trying to make the golden dinar the currency of a new United States of Africa. Yes. That's what really he got in the crosshairs. By the way, do you know that Sarkozy is now in prison?
Yes, he got convicted
with Gaddafi. Yeah. And he supported the invasion, so karma caught up to Sarkozy.
Yes. Well, you remember when Sarkozy was considered a scary right-winger by Americans?
Sure.
That was a long time ago now, and now people are cheerleading for
Macron,
who's so much worse than Sarkozy because he's supposedly keeping the fascists at bay.
Yeah, Macron is even to the right of Sarkozy, absolutely.
Macron is breaking heads in the street after promising to protect the people from fascism. That's a little stupid and ironic.
Yeah, it's like he's threatening to go back into Africa, but he can't even control the situation in his own
country.
He
made deals with the right-wing opponents he promised to stop to keep the left from taking power.
Well, technically I don't know if it's called vice president or vice prime minister, but technically his number 2 guy in his cabinet right now is supposed to be on the left, because
the prime minister now is from one of the left parties, but he's not Mélenchon, who runs the biggest left party and who should have been made leader.
Let me ask you: is Macron president or prime minister? I know the PM usually in Europe has less power.
So France has an interesting system, and I'm going to talk, and we can talk about that a little if you want. The French have a system by which the president is basically the king and has all these sort of special presidential powers, and the prime minister is the head of government and runs legislative stuff, but doesn't really actually have any power to challenge the president. He's just in charge of passing laws and stuff.
Yeah, so the president has more power in the French system. I heard about that.
Under the French system, the French president arguably has too much power. It's very dictatorial.
Didn't they get that law from Napoleon? There's still Napoleonic laws there.
No, the laws that empower the French president so much were originally passed to empower Charles de Gaulle.
Yeah, de Gaulle.
And de Gaulle ruled as a de facto dictator for quite a long time before he either retired or died. And then they started to elect a president after de Gaulle, and they got rid of things like lifetime tenure, but they didn't get rid of some of the most annoying powers that gave the president the power to veto the parliament without being overruled and stuff like that.
I would say it's quasi-emperor level power that a president has.
It's
left over from Napoleon.
The thing to remember is that de Gaulle ultimately ended up being a French Franco in a lot of ways. His government was not as openly oppressive as Franco's government in Spain or Salazar's government in Portugal, but he was largely indebted to coalitions between right-wing political parties and the military.
Which is ironic because he was part of the French resistance against.
And what ended his tenure as effective dictator and made things become more democratic again was when he ended up opposing the military and wanting to pull out of Algeria and make peace.
That's what I was about to say. When he pulled out of Algeria, there was a lot of
the military started conducting terrorism against the French government.
What didn't they call themselves? Like the Legion?
They called themselves the OAS, the official army service, but they were not acting officially in any way.
They were a paramilitary group that wanted to return to Algeria.
They were paramilitary terrorists who were trying to kill de Gaulle.
Yeah, that too.
Mostly they wanted to kill de Gaulle so that they could take over the government and, return to Algeria.
They didn't like de Gaulle either. De Gaulle went to Montreal and called for them to be independent from Canada. So the British were not big fans of de Gaulle either. Even though the
Americans weren't big fans of de Gaulle because he took France out of NATO.
Interesting.
And then later French presidents brought it back in. But de Gaulle took France out of NATO, and France was out of NATO for years, specifically because of opposition to, ironically, American policy in Vietnam that had been adopted to appease the French and make de Gaulle happy.
Well, now you don't have even Chirac stood up to Bush. Now you don't have a president of France attending.
Well, remember, Chirac was specifically replaced by Sarkozy because the French people thought they needed a president who would get along with Bush.
Well, yeah, but my point about Macron is he's completely capitulated to the United States and to Trump. And at the same time, it's interesting because the Europeans, some of them oppose Trump of coming from the right, where they want to continue the war in Ukraine, where they don't want any diplomatic solution. But at the same time, the France are just like the French government's opportunistic. That's the best way to put it.
The best thing I can put it. The best way I can put it is there's a reason that Finland and Sweden chose to join NATO just at the same time that NATO started to commit to protecting a Nazi government.
It had nothing to do with being afraid of Russia, did it?
Well, also the fact that Finland and Sweden are pro-Nazis in Ukraine if it weakens and contains Russia.
Governments are, but not a lot of the people.
That's the whole thing, is that Finland and Sweden both have a very, very large and popular far right that doesn't get talked about very much in the West, and that has made some rather unpleasant coalitions with the labor parties in Sweden and Finland. The Swedish Labor Party ended up putting COVID-denying anti-immigrant ministers in power the last time they won an election because they wanted to make a common cause with certain elements on the right that they felt would support them.
Well, they did an opinion poll, I think it was about a year ago, in Germany to decide what world leader was the biggest threat to world peace. And it was like 90% Trump.
Yep.
And 1%, maybe 1.2% Putin. But it's like it was so clear that the Germans knew that the US blew up their pipeline. knew that the U.S. was a threat to them, not Russia. It was like overwhelming majority of the United States. Hardly anybody thought Russia was a threat. So why do they keep getting leaders elected that say, come and bomb our next pipeline? Like, let's sell out the United States. Like, they're just rushing to see how much they can go on their knees before the United States, even though so many of the German people oppose that. Like, I guess their parliamentarians are screwed up or something.
I mean, the German Social Democrats and the German Greens are just so completely compromised by capital that they're no different from the parties from the Christian Democrats.
Right.
I have to agree with the Socialist Equality Party about that. The German Greens and Social Democrats are just fundamentally no different from the Christian Democrats in the way we have Republicans like Henry Cuellar and Hakeem Jeffries, who are fundamentally no different than Republicans.
Well, the thing is, the Green Party in Latin America, in several Latin American countries and in the United States, tend to be on the left. But the Green Party, I wouldn't say full right, but in Germany, a lot of those countries, they're kind of center right.
The Green parties in Europe are liberal, and that's the problem.
Right, they're not progressive; they're liberal. I mean, by our standards, of course, their standards of what right is like we would call some European conservative or Canadian conservative in the United States, maybe even a socialist. Not saying they were we won, but our standards are so far to the right.
Well,
now.
not anymore, because more and more the European right is being dominated by those hardcore neo-Nazi types who want to completely rewrite the history of World War II and make Stalin the bad guy and Hitler a U.S. ally.
Right.
I mean, it's
or
kind
they
of
even say Hitler because he called himself a National Socialist was a socialist, but he infiltrated a party that had the word socialist in it and made them a fascist party because he was a big admirer of Mussolini and all that.
This is the best part, is that Hitler was an agent of the government who joined the party in order to influence it, and ended up its leader.
Yep.
It's just so hilarious.
Well, a lot of things backfire. Like, for example, Idi Amin was placed in power by 3 different countries, Britain, Israel, and the United States. He turned against them later. And the same thing is said for about Saddam. Saddam was the CIA's guy, the CIA's darling that was put in power in Iraq and then later turned against them.
Well, he didn't even really turn against them. He thought he had CIA blessing to invade Kuwait. He would never have done it if he didn't think he had permission.
Yeah.
That's the most disgusting thing about it. No one ever talks about the fact that the U.S. ambassador to Kuwait told the Iraqi ambassador to Kuwait that the U.S. didn't care if Saddam invaded Kuwait. It was fine with them as long as it didn't disrupt the way BP did business in Kuwait.
Well, I'll put it this way. Saddam early on was supporting Palestinian fighters against Israel, and the CIA didn't like that. So he was doing some things that the CIA didn't like. He didn't do all their bidding. But yeah, when it came to invasion stuff like that, he thought he had permission.
Well, he had the war with Iraq. He was our surrogate in that Iraq-Iran war.
Yes.
We gave him chemical weapons to use against the Iranians that were used, that were not just used against Iranian troops, but were also used in rocket attacks on civilian populations. And, we then wonder why he ends up being a bad person. Well, because the U.S. paid him to be a bad person.
Absolutely, gave him the weapons. He also did business with the Soviet Union. He was kind of playing both sides. He was opportunistic.
He was playing both sides. He came up as part of the Ba'ath Party, and the official line of the Ba'ath Party was pan-Arabist and socialist.
And I believe the Ba'ath Party was started by a Syrian Christian, but he was ousted by the party. He didn't like the direction they were going.
There were 3 versions of the Ba'ath Party. The original version of the Ba'ath Party started in Egypt and had a different name, and was founded by Gamal Abdel Nasser.
Oh, yeah, Nasser was a socialist.
The Iraqi and Syrian Ba'ath parties were founded by political revolutionary movements who opposed colonial administration through the King of Iraq, who was a British puppet.
Yeah, the Shah was a puppet too in Iran.
Well, the irony is, of course, the Shah got thrown out. The Shah was allowed to fall because he didn't want to be a puppet when it came to oil. He was willing to be a puppet for almost everything else, but he wanted to take control of Iran's oil and take it away from American
oil. He was trying
oil.
to do what Mossadegh did prior, and that's why they ousted Mossadegh.
Yes, exactly. The Shah was more successful than Mossadegh at oil politics, and that's why he had to go. Even though he had been willing to do our dirty work in every other aspect of his regime, he wasn't willing to suborn his interests in the oil to the U.S.
The thing is, the United States doesn't mind like a monarch selling out to them and then giving some of the oil to the people to enrich them, kind of like the Saudis are doing. But when it comes to a socialist leader who really wants to, make an egalitarian society and use that wealth for the betterment of their society without selling out the United States, that's when they have to go in and invade. And by the way, I want to point out that Trump is a hypocrite in many ways, but not when it comes to certain statements he makes.
I mean, he says outright, we want to steal the oil. It's our oil.
This is something that's never been said before. He said, our land. Venezuelan land is our land. This is our oil that they stole from us. Unbelievable. Nobody can deny at this point now what the war's about.
Well, and that's the whole thing, of course. That's how American capitalists see it. They buy oil exploration rights. It's their oil. They buy land. It's their land. Nobody has the right to take it away from them.
That was back in the 70s, way before Chavez.
Oh, I know.
Nationalization effort. I mean, Chavez tried to make a better deal for his people, but this was something that was happening before the Chavez.
Oh, I know. That's why even though the government was a little bit right-wing, Che in that interview with Face the Nation says that he thinks Venezuela is progressive because they were trying to actually maintain control of their oil and use their state oil company to fund their welfare state.
Well, what he actually said in the interview, they asked him if he thought the Venezuelan government was progressive. And Che died in the 1960s, right? So it was prior to that.
Yes.
But he said that word is ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't want to say like that the Cubans were supporting the Venezuelans, but government-wise. But there was talk in the 60s of nationalization. Yeah.
Yes.
I think my father needs my help with something, but we've been speaking about an hour.
Yes.
Just 1 second. I'll be right back.
Of course. And if Alex needs to go, folks, then we may wrap up in a moment or two. We'll see what happens. I hope you're still enjoying the show. I'm glad to finally have Alex back. We've been trying to make this happen for a few weeks, and I actually announced it once a couple of weeks ago, but some of the changes that have been made to the way Twitter messaging works.
Hey, Chris, I gotta get going, but it's been a pleasure talking with you, brother. Keep in touch.
You have a great week, and we'll talk again. Take care.
Take care.
So I want to follow this up by noting how long stuff like this has been going on. And so I'm going to recite a little bit of poetry at you. And I forgive you. Please forgive me for being self-indulgent like this. But I really love this song, and I think it makes great poetry. And as a result, I really want to share this with you, because this is not about Venezuela, but this is what we're talking about when we talk about, overthrowing Maduro and making Venezuela democratic. And I think it's important that we go back to this so that we can understand some of what's going on. There's a sunny little country south of Mexico where the winds are gentle and the waters flow. But breezes aren't the only things that blow in El Salvador. If you took the little lady for a moonlight drive, odds are still good you'd come back alive. But everyone is innocent until they arrive in El Salvador. The rebels take a bus on the Grand Highway. The government destroys a village miles away. The man on the radio says, now we'll play south of the border. And in the morning, the natives say, we're happy you have lived another day. Last night, 1,000 more passed away in El Salvador. There's a television crew here from ABC filming Rio Lempe and the refugees, calling murdered children the tragedy of El Salvador. Before the government camera 20 feet away, another man is asking for continued aid, food and medicine and hand grenades for El Salvador. There's a thump, a rumble, and the buildings sway. A soldier fires the acid spray. The public address system starts to play south of the border. You run for cover and hide your eyes. You hear the screams from paradise. They've fallen further than you realize in El Salvador. Well, just like Poland is protected by her Russian friends, the junta is assisted by Americans. And if $60 million seems too much to spend in El Salvador, well, they say for $500 million, they could do it right. Bomb all day and burn all night until there's not a living thing upright in El Salvador. They'll continue training troops in the USA to catch the nuns that got away and teach the military bands to play south of the border and kill the people to set them free. Who put this price on their liberty? Don't you think it's time to leave El Salvador? Now, this song was written in the early 80s by a man named Noel Stuckey, who was better known as Paul and was a member of a folk rock group called Peter, Paul, and Mary that was on its last legs after being successful in the 70s. But this can really talk, if you take out the specific references to El Salvador and you just talk about what's being done in the name of America, well, then this could be any place the U.S. sends troops. And if the U.S. successfully invades Venezuela, then they have to stay there, and we get a government that looks like the junta in El Salvador, that does horrible things to the Venezuelan people to do our bidding, after we've done lots of complaining about human rights in Venezuela as our excuse to invade the country and kill the people to set them free. So I'll ask you what Paul asked about people in El Salvador. If we have to kill the people to set them free, who put this price on their liberty? Thank you very much for joining us this week. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I thank you for indulging my monologue here at the end. Please support the show. We need patrons. We need subscribers. We need folks willing to share this media. So if you like this, hit the like button, share this somewhere, subscribe to the YouTube channel, join us on Patreon. Help us to get people educated to resist. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great week. And until next time, I'll tweet at you.